Hey everybody, this is your host, Deshaun Sullivan. Welcome to the Sully Podcast. Here, again, we usually talk about most things about human trafficking and things like that. So with it being February finally, it's Black History Month. I do want to go over a little bit of the past, slave trades and things like that, so that everybody's knowledgeable and aware on the history that's not very well known, not very talked about. So where we'll start is that, so there was two slave trades going on at one time. There was the transatlantic slave trade and the trans-Saharan slave trade of the Silk Road. And so with both of those going on simultaneously, that led to the Western world and a lot of the Arab world to own predominantly black slaves. So there were slaves around the entire world at this point being sold, and their time, their labor was being consumed free of charge, which is obviously a very downgraded history of ours, a very ugly, history that a lot of black people do have in their past is this thing about slavery. So with, my last name being Sullivan, obviously that comes from Sullivan's Island. My descendants eventually, at one point in time, not so long ago, within the last 200 years or so, we'll say 600 to 200 years at least, at that point, some of them had to have came through, through Sullivan's Island. They were branded with their last name as their slave owner's name, Sullivan, and that's just what it was, Again, I feel like a lot of people don't understand the severity of like how black people are always really treated throughout the world when it comes to them being degraded and looked down upon, because once more, like a lot of different ethnicities, cultures, and things like that did have slaves. Recently I had somebody comment, to me on my Instagram via, they were talking all about the Arab slave trade and how black people love to claim an Arab identity, when they don't like to go based off the whole, Western, more European slave trade. And a lot of people don't understand the first Arabs were actually black Arabs. Half of what we consider, the Arab world is in Africa. The Somalis are Arab. The Ethiopians are technically Caucasian. The Sudanese, they're Arab. The Moroccans, they are Arab, things like that. So literally, Tunisia, they're Arab, the entire tip of Africa, the entire northern part, and almost half of Africa is technically considered Arab, So you can't really speak about Arab history without speaking about black people being the first Arabs. That was just a thing. Granted, a lot of people do, I want to really speak on this one, a lot of people do tend to associate Islam with only being like this Arab religion, that only Arabs have it, or like some Africans somewhere poor in the dirt, that have a teepee and a hut, like that's what Islam is for. A lot of people, especially here in the West, in America's one of the dumbest places that you can really live when you really think about it. A lot of people that did migrate to America just did not have the access to education that was already available in the rest of the world, especially in the Arab world, North African world, in Asia is where lots of different things actually came from, like math, lots of different sciences, and especially sociology. Apparently, this guy, he wrote that the father of sociology, Ibn Battuta, was actually associating blacks with being subhuman and more closely related to a animal form, which is crazy, and that the blacks were scared of Arabs, and that the Arabs would bait the blacks with food and eventually enslave these people that way. Which, going into modern day history, right, we can see how the promise of something like money, so substance, the promise of abundance in general can enslave somebody into a system where they either know it or they don't know it willingly. Comfort can be your prison. So that's one thing that I will say that is true about that. But the degradation, the slavery, all the stuff that goes on, that's very negative and downtrodden. A lot of that crap, it not only is it not called for, but it's the past, Africa's taken such a big leap and bound within their own progress and success between themselves, partnering with Russia and different places like China, Turkey, really trying to actually develop Africa. It doesn't always have to be exploited, it is still being exploited. How we see in the Congo, how we even see in Sudan between all the infighting and things like that are caused by proxy groups. Africa's definitely still being exploited, but there's a lot more infrastructure that is built there in modern day to more so emulate, lots of the past kingdoms, from the Fulani tribes, the Zulus and things like that. There was lots of different kingdoms and things like that, the Ashanti, that were set up in Africa way before the Umayyad Caliphate actually did have slaves. And again, there's infighting everywhere, in every race, in every place on this earth. There's always gonna be infighting, which kind of brings me to my next point with the American slave trade. The first slave owner in America was black. He was a black man who went to court to fight for his right to have slaves. So for me, I'm not against reparations. I will never be against reparations. If somebody has some money out for me, you can't turn it down. That's dumb. But what I will say, to that point, of the first slave owner in America being black, it's good to say and see that, like, black people, we do a lot of this stuff to ourselves, and then we create, these false images and beliefs, that, later on, that we are, apparently some type of gods on the earth, or demigods on the earth, and people had to suppress us and blah, blah, blah. Like, stuff like that is just racist and it's ignorant. And like, you have to really think hard to create such a false narrative, such a crazy thing, an assumption inside your head. But what I will say is that even during colonization of, Haiti, for example, from the French Empire, when France did colonize Haiti, Haiti was making more money. They actually had more money. They had more substance than the entire Spanish Empire in of itself, like the entire thing, one small colony. So let's say, for example, modern day Palestine, for example, would have made more money than modern day America. That's the same comparison as to what happened then at that point. So, like, again, to even try to downtrodden people and consider slavery and things like that, like, all that there is in their history, it's very ignorant and stupid. But it's also good, again, to point out that, like, for the people, for my people, especially for black folks in general, we just got to stop doing stuff to ourselves. Not everything that glitters is gold. Not all money is good. Again, for the human trafficking thing, that is slavery. There's more slaves in the world right now, this present day, than every single last slave trade combined together. There's more in the world. Granted, there's more people, but there's also more slaves in the world, meaning that there's more people being made slaves today than there was back then at that point, with the equal ratios. That being said, that's what we need to kind of focus on more so today, and less of, like, the weird, fetishized, glamorized whip you on the back, slave trade idea that we have. Black people, again, you're probably the most fetishized people, just how it is on the earth because of that main thing, slavery. And so to kind of go out of that mindset for us would always be good to learn our history, to not really care or think about what other people say about you. What people say is irrelevant. A lot of people live in a fantasy world. But today, that's where I'm going to go ahead and end this episode. You can follow the Selly Podcast on all the, on every single last profile that I have listed above. And I hope to see you guys here soon. God bless.